to the first slide, please. So good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to the webinar this afternoon, where we'll be covering more about the EYE and the EYP knowledge-only pathway options. I'm Paul White, I'm the Head of Provider Development, and I'll be facilitating the session this afternoon. I'm joined by Shuma Hussain, one of our Qualifications Development Managers, and Janet King, our Sector Manager for Education and Childcare. Briefly, the format of the session is that colleagues were given an opportunity to ask some questions in the registration document when you first registered for the webinar. So what we've attempted to do is to weave those questions into some of the content that we're going to be presenting today. And then once we've completed the delivery of the slides, I shall be checking through the chat box, which is in the bottom right hand side corner of your screen on the side panel. So if you feel that there are questions that you would still like to ask or that haven't yet been sort of covered to the extent that you'd hoped to, please pop those in, and I'll put those questions to Janet and to Shuma at the end of the session. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Janet, who's now going to sort of outline the content of the session and then work through the slides. So thank you, Janet.
Thank you, Paul, and hello to everybody on the webinar. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. So really this is talking about the early years educator EYE and the practitioner EYP qualifications and the different sort of routes that you can take, and we'll think about those options as we go. So what the webinar will cover, we can see here that there will be an exploration of the options for learners completing Level 3 Early Years Educator and Level 2 Early Years Practitioner qualifications this academic year, and in looking primarily at those knowledge-only pathways. What needs to be completed by learners wishing to undertake the knowledge-only versions of those original qualifications, and a closer look at Unit 16 within the NCFE Cash Technical Level 3 Diploma in Childcare and Education, and with the knowledge-only pathway option. There'll be an opportunity to find out more from colleagues, from staff who are on the webinar today, to consider all aspects of taking this route, as well as time for any questions that you may have. So we, as Paul said, we have looked at the questions that have been sent in ahead of the webinar, and we've tried very much to make sure that your questions have been answered in context. But of course, if you don't get the answers that you need and you still have things on your mind, then please do add those to the chat as we go, and we will certainly make some time to look at those as we go. So before we move on, let's just think what those options are, and let's make sure we're clear on all of the different options. It's been quite a year again, and so it's important to have some clarity around the different options when students are now beginning. They're in that sort of final stretch, if you like, towards their certification, towards completion in this summer. So what are those options for learners completing the Level 2 Early Years Practitioner or the Level 3 Early Years Educator qualifications this year? Well, one option, of course, is business as usual. I guess it wouldn't be on this webinar if your students were falling into this category, but I just want to start with the whole picture, and then we'll sort of look at those qualifications that are directly impacted by knowledge only. When we say that there's one option that's business as usual, what we're really thinking of is, have your students been able to gain placement in one way or another, and they've been able to meet all the competencies, so Unit 8 and 15 from the Diploma in Childcare and Education, Unit 16 in full from that technical version of that qualification, and the skills related to any other of the early years educator or early years practitioner qualifications in line with specification requirements. If your students have been able to complete as business as usual, then there is no need to think of adaptation. If your students are completing a qualification with limited placement opportunity, that's where the risk-rated approach for Level 2 Early Years Practitioner and Level 3 Early Years Educator qualifications really do have a purpose. You will find all of those on the adaptations pages on QualHub by searching the relevant qualification. This will allow full certification and employment in ratio at Level 2 or Level 3 as appropriate in early years settings. So it's important just to make sure which category is best fitting my students. You know, is it going to be that actually it's been business as usual, I don't even need to think about adaptation? Unlikely if you're on this webinar. Is it that actually there's been limited opportunity in placement? However, that DFE risk-rated approach that takes me through the EYP or EYE criteria is allowing me to be able to assess those students along that amber, things that must be seen, or you know, by an assessor or through an expert witness testimony. The grey, embedded in the knowledge, the green, looking at further adaptations and further assessment methods. Is the risk-rated approach the best way for my students? Another option, of course, would be to delay. You could delay the certification and follow that risk-rated approach over the summer period. Late portal entries do not guarantee certification by published results days, of course, and learner progression must be a consideration here when you're thinking of that option. For example, if you need to have that result this side of the summer for progression from Level 2 to Level 3, and of course with the Ucas and the entry to higher education for Level 3 students who are progressing to higher education institutes. Okay, so that other option then would be to transfer to a knowledge-only pathway, and that's where we're going to concentrate most of our efforts from now on in the webinar. It's important to know just right up front that if you were transferring students from an original qualification, and we'll look at what those qualifications are in a moment, that funding and Ucas tariff scores, they're not impacted. So, and there will also be the option for the top-up to a full EYP or EYE status for learners moving forward. So we've got all of those different options, and it's important to really give yourself some time to think what is the best option for my students. You don't want to be rushing into a knowledge-only pathway if students are on placement and you feel as though a risk-rated approach is best for them, if employment is the goal, and so on. But it's really, really good to be able to have that option and to be able to ensure that students are being valued for Level 2 achievements where placement has been limited or non-existent. And likewise for Level 3 where placement has been so limited that it would be inappropriate to use a risk-rated approach, and where to delay would impact their potential progression to higher education. So if we move over to the next slide, we can see on here the qualifications that are sort of included in the knowledge-only pathway options. So if your students are actually taking any of these qualifications at the moment, you can see quite clearly there that there is a knowledge-only pathway route. So we have the Level 3 Diploma in Early Years Education and Care, the technical version of that qualification, and likewise the Diploma for the Early Years Workforce knowledge only pathway, and we'll look at all of these individually to make sure that any particular specific qualifications that are aligned to the qualifications you're offering are discussed in appropriate detail for you. The Level 3 Diploma in Childcare and Education, the technical version of that qualification, and of course the Level 2 Diploma for the Early Years Practitioner. So those are the qualifications where there is a knowledge-only pathway route. Now, it's important to note before we do start looking at these qualifications individually that actually, remember, Ucas points, where applicable, have not been impacted. The qualification code, if you see in that very first column there, reference numbers, qualification reference codes and so on have not been impacted. So there's going to be no issues in terms of funding, in terms of Ucas points, and a very smooth transient process to be able to transfer your students across. And we'll talk about all of those as we go. So let's look at each of these qualifications in a little bit more specific detail on the next slide. So we will start by thinking thank you, Molly. So we'll start by thinking about the Level 2, that Level 2 Diploma for the Early Years Practitioner Knowledge Only Pathway. And that will be the title, that will be what's shown on the certificate. And that, of course, is really important. That's really important for employers, and it's also important for students to know exactly what it is they're being certificated for, what their level of achievement is, the fact that this is now not a license to practice, okay? Knowledge-only pathway qualifications are not license to practice qualifications, but they will allow for an appreciation of study that has taken place. So for Level 2, what does the learner need to do? What needs to be completed? All knowledge criteria must be achieved. Now, of course, if you're involved in delivering this qualification, you will know that there's only possibly one, certainly not very many units that are knowledge only. These units that make up the Level 2 Early Years Practitioner are a mixture, aren't they, of knowledge and skills. So what has to happen is the knowledge-only criteria must be achieved. So whilst most units do show a combination of knowledge and skill, this will show partial completion in the specification. But when you're claiming for that qualification on the portal, claim for the qualification in full. The certificate itself will differentiate between that partial and complete unit and qualification certification by actually expressing and identifying knowledge-only pathway. So you will have to claim for the full unit, but it's expected that students will have, and appreciated, that students will have partial completion of that qualification. The Level 3 Diploma in Early Years Education and Care is built in the same sort of way. Most of those units are a combination of knowledge, so those learning outcomes that are beginning with understand, and skills, learning outcomes that are be able to, demanding and requiring some level of demonstration and competence in a real work environment. Again, you're going to be claiming for the full unit, but in reality, the students will have completed those units in a partial way. The certificate will identify learners as having completed the knowledge-only pathway, and that protects the integrity of that license to practice, makes it clear for employers, makes it clear for the Department for Education, who have identified these knowledge-only pathways as not licensed to practice on their full and relevant qualification list. The learners will, on the Education and Childcare, Education and Care Diploma, will also be doing Unit 3.15, which of course is that longitudinal study. So there is an adaptation for that, where students can use a preset of observations, those 4 observations that have actually been written in advance. Students can use those, and there's a revised mark scheme for you to be able to check that work. So 3.15, which is a knowledge only, which is a longitudinal study, has been adapted so that knowledge only can be applied. The level 3, the technical level 3 diploma in early years education and care will be exactly the same. It's exactly the same unit. It's a technical version of the previous one, and of course, external assessments will have been subject to a teacher assessed grade. The level 3 diploma for the early years workforce, again, we're looking at these qualifications and thinking these units so far in all of the qualifications we've identified have got that mixture of knowledge and skill. Really important, again, to make sure that students are completing all of the knowledge, so learning outcomes that have assessment criteria associated to them that are beginning with understand, implies that evidence should be generated against that knowledge only. And this now includes the completion of the adaptation for that longitudinal study, as we've said. So moving on to the, staying on this slide, but moving on to the cash level 3 diploma in childcare and education, knowledge only pathway. This qualification includes the certificate. Now, if students are only completing the certificate, and so therefore units 1 to 8 are relevant within this approach, students have got some options here. So students can complete unit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and do the knowledge component of 8. So you'll be familiar with that if you teach this particular qualification. They have a set of learning outcomes in Unit 8 that are beginning with understand, and those are graded. You get a grade for that, that side, and then you have to be able to professional practice portfolio and the skills and the competencies that are related to Unit 8. If your students are progressing onto the diploma, and so they're first year students now, and they're progressing from September 21 onto the second year diploma, students can progress without the practice portfolio elements of Unit 8 completed, and they can be completed over into that second year. So it won't inhibit or hinder progression. If, however, your students are completing the certificate only, then students should complete, as we've just said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, complete 8 for the graded element of that, which is the knowledge only side of Unit 8, and they can claim for that full certificate as normal. So they don't need to do the be able to skills component to exit with the certificate. Likewise, if your student is completing this qualification and they come into the end of their second year, they should do the knowledge side of Unit 8 and the knowledge side of Unit 15. They don't need to have done any of the practice portfolio elements that are be able to. They probably are likely to have done some, but if they've not done enough to meet that risk-rated approach and they're claiming knowledge-only pathway, then you would claim for all of your units 1 through to 15, and there's an appreciation that 15 will be a partial or nil completion for the be able to criteria. When it comes to the level 3 diploma sorry, if we move on to the next slide, sorry, where we've got some things spread out, I think, over 2 slides. Thank you. So we've just looked at the diploma in childcare and education there, and hopefully the explanation made sense in terms of year 1 certificate and year 2. Last but not least, we've got the technical level 3 diploma in childcare and education there. And again, students will have limited or no completion, so partial completion or no completion of Unit 16. However, Unit 16 does contain, and we're going to go on to look at this in a moment, but Unit 16 does contain some elements that are listed in the Be Able To, but actually are embedded in the knowledge that students have already done within their internally assessed units. And I'll show you some examples in a minute. So you will be claiming on the portal for all units, all the way through, including Unit 16, but there is an appreciation because of the knowledge-only pathway identified on that certificate for final completion that students have got partial or nil on the skills-based elements of Unit 16. However, they will have shown some appreciation of Unit 16 in the knowledge. Let me give you some sort of reassurances of what those might be on the next slide. Thank you. So here we can see there's some aspects of Unit 16 taken here. So we've got 17, be able to facilitate play opportunities with children. It's absolutely a skills-based, but explaining how play opportunities should provide a balance between child-initiated and adult-led play is embedded into Unit 5, which has been internally assessed and achieved. Again, another example, be able to provide enabling play environments, and we're planning in 20.1, planning an enabling play environment indoors and outdoors. And we can see aspects of that in Unit 2. Be able to maintain accurate and coherent records in line with organisational requirements. An aspect of that, 23.1, explain confidentiality in relation to record keeping and reporting. There's elements of that embedded in the internal assessment of Unit 3. And then the number 31, the criteria 31 from Unit 16 is about using reflective practice to contribute to a student's own professional development. And the criteria listed there, developing a curriculum vitae, so doing a CV, reviewing the student's own learning needs, their professional interests, their development opportunities, devising their own development plan in relation to feedback obtained, in relation to own progress made, and their further goals and ambitions is all also something that can be part of Unit 13, along with that 31.5, explaining how reflective practice leads to improved ways of working. So yes, you're making a partial claim for Unit 16. There's some knowledge embedded. We've picked out the obvious knowledge that it is achievable without being anchored within that real work environment. And that partial claim will show an appreciation to a knowledge-only route when you actually make that particular claim. Okay. So I'm just going to stay on this slide for a moment, because what I'd like to do now is just look at some of the key questions that we've received, and I just want to make sure that I clarify some of the issues that people have been having. So, for example, how do we top up? So what about students when they've gone on that knowledge-only pathway, they've achieved, they've got an appreciation of what they've done in terms of knowledge, and they want to then, at a later date, they want to top up. So learners will need to spend sufficient time in placement, potentially a block placement in an early years setting, working through the criteria identified in the appropriate risk-rated approach documentation, so either the level 2 DFE risk rate or the level 3 risk-rated approach for the early years educators. So as centres, you can use expert witness testimony and triangulation or direct assessor observation for the achievement of that AMBER criteria, as is at the moment, and follow the guidance for knowledge, which is in the grey, and those alternative methods in the green. And once you're satisfied of competence, that qualification can be claimed. And we'll talk about that transfer as we go through some of these questions as well. So there are thoughts, of course, around, well, how does that work? And are there going to be any fees involved in the top-up to the original qualification? And what is the process? So the fees for both the original qualification and knowledge-only qualifications are the same. So there's no fee to transfer across to the knowledge-only qualification or back up to the normal qualification. However, where a student claims the certificate on knowledge only and then wishes to top up onto the original qualification, they can do so incurring a transfer fee. That transfer fee is currently £25 and is charged per learner. So if transferred individually or if a group of learners are done at the same time, it's going to be a one-off fee of £25 for the whole group. So it's more cost effective, therefore, to transfer your learners in cohorts, in groups, to save being charged the fee per each individual. Now, these questions, we will make sure that they're available through our communication channels. So if there's anything here that you feel that you need to share with someone, then these will be on a communication. So what about learners that have transferred over to the knowledge-only version and transferring back? Yes, absolutely. Learners can do this if they do not complete their learning on the knowledge-only version. However, in this instance, a transfer fee will apply. If learners have made a certificate claim on knowledge-only and wish to undertake the original version, then we're looking at RPLing that content. But remember that information about fees and about transferring learners in groups rather than individually. What happens to banked grades that have been submitted on the original qualifications? Please don't worry where you may have banked grades, especially where you've banked grades for qualifications that are nested, where you're sort of doing a year and then you've got your second year. That sometimes is the case. Our customer recovery team will ensure that any banked grades that have already been submitted on that original fuller qualification, if you like, are carried over to the knowledge-only versions of the qualifications as part of that transfer. And it will be the customer recovery team who will help you with any queries regarding the actual logistics of making that transfer, and all of the information and detail for how to do that is set out in QualHub. You just need to find your qualification and look for information around the knowledge-only pathway and that transfer. So it's important to note, of course, that risk-rated approach has been brought in at a time as part of an adaptation and mitigation to ensure that licence to practice qualifications held that rigour. So what about learners using the risk-rated approach to top up? There should be absolutely no problems with this, and we don't anticipate any changes to that risk-rated approach for learners that have been impacted by the pandemic. However, of course, with all things, we do need to say that we must be guided by the Department of Education and any further reviews over time. So we'll monitor that and we'll inform you of that. But students that have been impacted, who have been studying within this pandemic, we see no logical and well-reasoned explanation for why they wouldn't be able to use that risk-rated approach to top up. Likewise, is there a time limit for learners who want to top up for the full qualification? And learners registered on that full or original EYE or level 2 EYP qualification, there's no time limit set by us. Your sort of recognition of prior learning policies and associated procedures may be time constrained, and so attention should be given to such requirements. For example, where a policy dictates that learning has taken place outside of the scope of that policy, then requirements would need to be further strengthened to confirm any competencies that are actually involved there. So some key messages are: remember those options. Think carefully about which option would be the right one for your students. Is it that the risk-rated approach may well work and you want to get that license to practice? Is it that a risk-rated approach is completely inappropriate? In that case, you've got those options. Do I delay, or actually should I claim the knowledge-only pathway so that the students on level 2 are being valued for what they're doing? The students on level 3 are able again to be valued for what they've done, but also for those qualifications that allow Ucas can continue on to higher education with the same Ucas points, and so their journey is not interrupted in that way, and of course shouldn't be. These students deserve to be valued for what they've done. In my opinion, yourselves and those students involved are the most resilient that we've ever had. So think about those options, think very carefully about them, and make sure you're choosing the right one for you. If you're going knowledge only, you know that you can contact our customer recovery team, or you can look at the information that's on the Qual Hub, on the pages that show about the knowledge only pathway for your particular qualification, and it will take you through the stages of what you need to do from a logistical point of view. But our systems are ready, our systems are geared up to do that. You're claiming for full qualifications. We appreciate and expect that they are partially complete in relation to the skills, and the certificate acknowledges that because it will give the qualification title that the student expects to see, but knowledge only pathway clearly identifiable for that reassurance to employers, for that sort of status of what that achievement is. And then there is the option to top up as appropriate, and if that's the best thing for the student to do, because they are wanting to go on to employment in the early years setting. So I'm going to pause there to pass back to Paul to see if we've had any more specific questions in the chat. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, Janet. Yeah, so we'll move on to the questions then. So I'm just going to mention the first names, just so we don't disclose anybody's full details, but just so that they know that we've picked their points up. So Jennifer has asked, will NCFE go through the qualification specification again for September 2021 delivery? She just goes on to say there's been a lot of changes to assessment methods and mandatory requirements added to some quals, so it'd be great to know that what is now expected for achievement from September 2021. So I'll just go back to the actual question, Janet. Will NCFE go through the qual specs again for September 2021 delivery?
Okay. Well, obviously, it's a good question, Jennifer, so thank you for raising that. We have no anticipated further review of our early years educator, early years practitioner qualifications. We will continue, of course, to monitor situations to see how students are progressing, to see how, you know, what the impact moving forward is likely to be for our students. And of course, we will continue to communicate with the Department for Education very closely to make sure that those qualifications remain fit for purpose, that they are rigorous and robust, and that students are able to achieve. So where we feel there's any potential disadvantage, we will respond immediately and we'll be proactive in that, as we have been all the way through, you know, in bringing the knowledge-only pathway, for example. So if I'm understanding your question correctly, and I apologise if not, we don't anticipate any changes. Where you're looking at the early years foundation stage in terms of the reforms, and those reforms that are impacting sort of the ELGs towards the end of reception year, we would always just recommend that legislation and statutory frameworks, of course, are the most accurate and up to date, that students are exposed to those, but we anticipate no further changes to our qualifications. Shuma, can I just ask you to confirm in case you know something different?
Hi everyone. Yes, we don't have any plans at the moment, but as Janet says, we are keeping abreast of any policy changes, what the Department for Education are saying as well. As Janet says, as and when we do have any updates, we'll be sure to communicate with you all as early as we can, and also perhaps hold additional webinars to clarify any changes. So at present, as Janet said, there are no updates planned in, but that's not to say that there may not be as and when we see learners completing and find out how they're progressing using the risk-weighted approach.
Okay, thanks for that, Shuma. That's great. I'm going to just move on to the next question. Janet, I think this might be for you, and this is from Abigail. Is the Level 3 certificate in childcare and education included in the knowledge only?
Yes, thank you, Abigail. Yes, it absolutely is. So students can actually claim that Level 3 certificate in childcare and education. They would complete all of those 8 units that are part of that first year. If your student, this is where you've got a couple of options, Abigail. So if your student is progressing onto the second year, then you would be able to just transfer that learner, you know, sorry, let that student progress onto their second year and claim for 8 and 15 as normal, sort of moving forward. If your student is leaving at the end of that first year, Abigail, then they absolutely can claim that knowledge only. It's not a license to practice, so you can claim it almost as business as usual. And the students should claim for all of those units, 1 to 8, and enter the grade that the student has got for the theoretical aspect of Unit 8, and you could claim the knowledge only in that way. If your student is progressing onto the diploma, then what you could do is not make that partial claim unless you wanted to, but actually achieve the qualification and claim that certificate at the end of the second year by combining the skills of Unit 8 and the skills of 15 together, albeit through a risk-rated approach. Does that help, Abigail?
Yeah, I've just dropped Abigail a message through the through the chat. So if there's any come back, I'll pick that up for you, Janet. I'm now going to turn to Stephanie. Stephanie, I've got a feeling this might be a Stephanie that I might have worked with in the past. So hello to you, Stephanie. Long time no see. And Stephanie's question is, I teach on the EY workforce. The learners are all in placement but did not have the chance to carry out the longitudinal study, and so have done the alternative. Do I claim this as adapted, but where they still get the full certificate and EYE qualification, as they have been deemed as completing in setting?
Yes, okay, so thank you. Stephanie, a good question and a really good one to be able to clarify. If your students have done the early years educator workforce and they've met everything within that qualification, they've met the knowledge, they've met the skills, but then they've hit a barrier when it comes to unit 3.15, the longitudinal study, then if they have done the adaptation where they've looked at the 4 observations that we've provided and you've marked them using that revised mark scheme, claim for the full qualification because they have absolutely shown that they are competent in the workplace. So that would be an adaptation, and it would not be a knowledge-only pathway, as long as, Stephanie, they are meeting the skills that are within those units. And that goes for the diploma in education and care, and the technical version of that qualification as well. If all of the skills have been achieved and they're just using an adapted longitudinal study, you can claim for the full qualification because they, as you say, they've proved their competence in the workplace. The knowledge only is going to actually not take account of, if you claim that, there is no appreciation of any skills that that student has claimed, has achieved. So that's the difference. So yes, EYE workforce, they've got all the knowledge, they've got all their skills, they're using an adaptive longitudinal study. Can they claim for the full qualification with a license to practice? Yes, they can.
Great, thank you very much, Janet. Just a bit of feedback, Janet, from both Abigail and Steph have said those responses have answered their questions, which is great. So I've got a question from Fiona. Unfortunately, Fiona was a little bit late just joining the session because she had auditory issues, but so she wasn't sure whether you'd fully discussed the how learners can pick up their competencies in the future. So that's the first one, and Fiona's got a second question as well, which is responsibility of assessing remains with the college even after the end of the academic year with the current fees that we've paid. So those two questions again, Janet, if we can just pick up the first one, any kind of like commentary on how learners pick up their competencies in the future.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a good question, Fiona. So those students that have done the knowledge only may, and they've claimed that knowledge only pathway, may of course want to top up moving forward, absolutely. And they should be given that sort of opportunity wherever possible. Now, to be able to do that, they could spend some time in a block placement. So what you don't want at the beginning of term, of course, is to have a group of students that don't really fit on any timetable because they're coming in to top up. So it was for you to decide, and at your sort of discretion. But I would suggest that it's possible to have a block placement in an early years setting where the students can gain expert witness testimonies, working through that risk-rated approach, looking at the AMBER, looking at all of those other criteria, and then an expert witness testimony can be used because we're still looking at that risk-rated approach. And that would need to be triangulated with other types of assessment methods. So a discussion with yourselves. So the I would say block placement, assessor doesn't need to visit unless they choose to, because I appreciate the funding issues and the time factors, etc. Expert witness would be required to meet those AMBERs, and you would need to have some wraparound professional discussion. It would be the centre that claims for that qualification and puts them back onto the original qualification to be able to claim that full license to practice. So the assessor would need to do a little bit of work around those expert witness testimonies, but it could be a professional discussion, it could be some reflective accounts to strengthen the AMBERs if they've been expert witness testimony. But that would be a way that you could actually manage that. Alternatively, you absolutely could go and visit that student, but again, that is then eating into a new timetable. And I appreciate what you're saying around the funding there. Hopefully that's answered both questions by putting them into context, but please do say, you know, if it doesn't for you, and add something to the chat and we'll pick it up again.
Okay, Janet, thank you for that. That's great. So moving on to Hilary, can you please confirm that we can transfer a whole cohort of students from knowledge only to top up for the £25 for the entire cohort if they're all transferred at once?
Hi Hilary, that's certainly the information I've received. So yeah, I'm just going to read this back. This has come from our development manager, so I can, yeah, I'm going to say it. So this is what's being said. £25. This is charged per learner if transferred individually, or if a group of learners are done at the same time. It will be a one-off fee of £25 for the whole group of learners in total. Therefore, it's more cost-effective to transfer learners in cohorts and groups to save being charged the fee per each individual. So yes, you've understood that, Hilary, as I've understood it too.
Great, thank you. That's wonderful. And Fiona's just confirmed that. Thank you for your response to her two questions. That was very clear. So the next one, and Shuma, please feel free to jump in if you think this is something that you might be able to support Janet with. I'm not sure, but is there a deadline for the knowledge only qualification for Ucas for uni this year? And that's from Denise.
Hi, Denise. I believe, so I'll go first, Shuma, and please do come in and correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to get this wrong. But we're working towards that 18th of June to be able to get those results in. And that's so that we can have certificates and end results ready for results day in line with Ucas and processes associated. Is that still the date that's been confirmed, Shuma? Has there been any alteration at all?
That's right, Janet. Not that I've been made aware of, but again, as we always say, if there is an update to that date, we will of course communicate it. But as far as we're aware, that is the date that we have been working towards, and that has Ucas confirmed.
Thank you. And what I would add to that is that it's never going to be brought forward. So if you think the 18th of June is the very last date, then go for that. And then of course, if it alters, it'll go the other way. It'll go beyond 18. So I would use 18 as your benchmark, to be honest.
Great, that's fantastic. Thank you, Janet. I've got a question now from Laura. Are there any knowledge only options for the supporting teaching and learning qualifications?
Thank you, Laura. I've actually got this written down, something to bring in at the end. So yes, thank you. We haven't got a knowledge only option because the Department for Education was concerned with license to practice and also with the kind of Ucas progression. But I do appreciate that it's been very difficult and just as challenging to go into placements in schools. We do appreciate that. What we have got are adaptations whereby you could think about working with students in a peer mentor type approach, especially within your own organisation. So perhaps year one, year two, looking at year one, and perhaps thinking about if you've got any level 1 provision or SEND provision within your organisation, also having that opportunity to be able to work closely within your organisation with different students. I do appreciate that it has been equally challenging in a school environment, and you know what we've tried to do, because there's not the regulation around that licence to practice side, so you're not looking at a risk-rated approach, and there's more freedom to be able to use that peer mentoring type approach within your own organisation. Laura, I hope that helps in some way, but I do appreciate what you're saying.
You've had a thank you there from Laura, Janet. So yes, that's great. Thanks. I've got hopefully, Shirley, I do this justice. We've got these in 2 parts, but so Janet, with reference to the level 2 EYP and level 3 early years workforce, if a student has had 1 observation completed, can their placement mentor provide witness statements to cover outstanding outcomes to enable full certification, or will knowledge only pathway be the option?
No, it's absolutely fine. So you can gain expert witness testimonies for the remaining criteria, for the AMBER criteria. So making sure you're looking at the DFE risk-rated approach for the early years practitioner, and likewise for the early years educator, and make sure that anything that's in AMBER has got an expert witness statement for that. And you would need to add some triangulation around that, because it's you that is making the claim, or your centre that's making the claim. So 1 observation, that's okay. Get some expert witness testimonies to make sure your AMBER criteria from your relevant risk-rated approach is met. Strengthen anything that's come from an AMBER, that's come from an expert witness testimony for an AMBER criteria. Strengthen it with other forms of assessment methods, such as a professional discussion, to make the claim in full. Thank you.
Okay, that's great, Janet. Colleagues, just to let you know that we will be wrapping up in a few minutes, so I'm going to take the questions that we've received up till this point. But I don't think we're going to have time to take any more questions now. But you can put them in the question or the chat box, depending on how it's been displayed on your device. Any of the questions that we don't get through, we will arrange to come up with some answer to those and put them into our FAQs after the webinar. So I'm going to take a question from Joe now. I think this is going to be quite a difficult one, Janet, just reading this, and I don't know whether we've got a settled position on this, but we will try our best. So if students are leaving with a knowledge-only qualification, will they still be able to get employment in the sector, then top up using witness testimony? If so, who is responsible for checking this work and signing it off? Because by then they would be ex-students.
Yeah, that's okay. I think this question is very similar, really, in context to the earlier question from Fiona, but perhaps from a different perspective. So, if a student is leaving with a knowledge-only qualification, they will not hold a licence to practice at level 2 for ratio at level 2, or at level 3, counting in ratio at level 3. They may be able to find employment as an unqualified member of staff. However, what I would say is that a student could go onto placement for a placement block, so therefore they're not coming into your training, not coming into your college or school or training institution. They're going onto a block placement, but they would still be under your arm. They would be able to gain expert witness testimonies for the AMBER criteria, And then what you would need to do is you would need to strengthen those competencies through a professional discussion and make the transfer back to the top up and claim in the usual way. But there would be, you are claiming as an assessor for your college, you would be making that claim. So whoever was doing the professional discussion would be making that claim. But they could, in theory, be in a placement block, whether they're employed as an unqualified member of staff or whether they're there as a volunteer. So they would still be under that student arm, under that college or school arm, and you would be responsible for them in order to make their claim. If you were making the top up, if the top up and the registration for that top up was coming from the centre, then it would sort of lie with you to make that overall claim and keep that student under your wing, so to speak. But in terms of do they need assessing or do they need to be on timetable during that period, no. You could have expert witness testimonies, but those would need to be triangulated through a professional discussion before the final claim was made. I hope that helps. I do understand where you're coming from.
Okay, Janet, that's great. We have had 2 or 3 other questions, Janet, which I think are in a similar vein, but I think that has responded hopefully to those other questions around that sort of license to practice issue. So we're at 5 o'clock. I've just got one question left that we received before the cut-off point that I'd set. So and Schumer, hopefully, I think this might be one that you might be able to answer, and this is about the EYE level 3. Is the knowledge option here to stay as an ongoing option for those just wishing to complete the knowledge only?
Yes, that is a good question, one that we've had a few centres querying about. I think at this moment in time, we can't absolutely confirm that it will be here to stay. That is something that we have been working with the Department for Education and Ucas on, and also the funding agency as well. So we are working through and trying to make that an option. We can't confirm at the moment how long that option will be available for, but considering that there are impacts on placement, and obviously we're not sure how long that will be around and how often learners will be impacted by this. It is for the foreseeable, it is an option. But again, we will be consulting with the Department for Education, Ucas and the ESFA about any cut-off dates, if you like, and we'll be sure to communicate that out as and when we know more information.
Okay, that's great, Schumer, and Lucy's just said thanks for that. That explained it really well. Yeah, there are still a few questions sitting there that we need to pick up. We were expecting quite a bit of traffic today, but as I say, we will pick these questions up and make sure that you get a reply to them. Molly, could we just move on to the final slide, just so we can find more information. So we will leave this slide here for you to view. I hope that the session today was really helpful, and that you feel more confident in going back into your centres and hopefully trying to implement some of the stuff that we've talked about today. So I'd like to say thank you to Janet and Schumer for presenting and answering the questions today. I would keep well in touch with our website and QualHub, where you will be able to find all the latest information. So thanks for joining us, and all the best from everyone at NCFE. Good day.